From the National Assembly, it is Thursday, June 10th, 2021. It is budget day, and in about an hour or less than that, we expect the Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury and Planning to be making a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government for the fiscal year 2021-2022, and the Cabinet Secretary is already within the presence of Parliament. As you have just watched on your screen, he arrived about 5 minutes ago and was received by members of the House leadership, led by the leader of Majority Party in the National Assembly, Honorable Amos Kimunya, and Honorable John Mbadi, leader of Minority Party in the National Assembly. The budget pronouncement, as anchored in Article 225 of the Constitution, that requires the Cabinet Secretary to update the House and indeed the country on the budget policy highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government as contemplated under the Public Finance Management Act. And that one is in line also with Article 244C, that also speaks to budget highlights and revenue-raising measures. And during that session, the Cabinet Secretary shall be also submitting to the National Assembly a legislative proposal setting out revenue-raising measures for the national government, together with a policy statement explaining those measures. And of course, you will remember or know that the budget pronouncement is a precursor to the tabling and discussion of the finance bill, whereby members of the National Assembly will be considering recommendations made by the Budget and Appropriations Committee, that is chaired by the Honorable Kanini Kega, and also any other submissions that may have been made in consideration to ensure that the total amount of revenue raised is consistent with the approved fiscal framework and in tandem with the Division of Revenue Act. That pronouncement that speaks to a 3.66 trillion budget, which is 750 billion shillings more than what was presented here in the National Assembly and to the entire country last year, will be coming up as from 3:15 or thereabouts, as indicated on the order paper. Before then, members shall be addressing a number of issues, including the introduction of 2 new bills in the National Assembly this afternoon: the National Government Constituencies Development Fund Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 4 of the year 2021. It is emanating from the Committee on National Government Constituencies Development Fund. And this one speaks to amendments to the National Government Constituencies Development Fund Act 2015 to provide for the opening and operating of constituency accounts in order to facilitate third-party transactions. The proposed amendments shall facilitate timely and efficient disbursement of funds to constituencies and establish structures for efficient and prudent management of the fund. The other new bill expected in the House this afternoon is the Kenya Roads Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 13 of the year 2021. This one speaks to amendments to the Kenya Roads Act number 2 of the year 2007, and it will be to align it with provisions of the Constitution regarding auditing functions of the Office of the Auditor General. And it is anchored on the premise that the Act currently refers to the defunct Office of the Controller of Budget and the Auditor General. Also listed in the order paper this afternoon, a number of questions. 1, an ordinary question from the Member of Parliament for Kajiado North, Honorable Joseph Manje. He's seeking answers from the Cabinet Secretary, ICT, Innovation and Youth Affairs. And he wants an update on the status of implementation of the Kenya National Addressing System under the Communications Authority, and which involves physical and electronic naming and numbering of buildings and streets. As you can see on your screen, the setup right there is in place, and that is the position that will be occupied by the Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury and Planning, Ukur Yatani, who's already within the presence of Parliament, having arrived about 10 minutes ago, and of course was received by members of the House leadership, Honorable Amos Kimunya, Leader of Majority, and Honorable John Badi, Leader of Minority. It is Budget Day, a live broadcast brought to you by the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit in conjunction with the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. My name is Vereso Mwanga, and on behalf of the entire crew, I welcome you to follow the proceedings, a sitting that will be presided over by the Speaker of the National Assembly, Honorable Justin Muturi, who is already in the chambers. Good afternoon.
Let us pray. Almighty God, who in wisdom and goodness have appointed the office of leaders and parliaments for the welfare of society and the just government of the people, we beseech you to behold with your abundant favor us, your servants, whom you've been pleased to call to the performance of important trusts in this republic. Let your blessings descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote your honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of our country and of those whose interests are committed to our charge. Amen.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair. Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions.
Honourable members, pursuant to standing order number 225, subsection 2, paragraph B, I wish to report to the House that I have received a petition from Messrs. D.G. Jau and L.R. Ngure on behalf of several other ex-Kenya Air Force officers who were dismissed in 1982. Honourable members, the petitioners claim to have diligently served the nation through the Kenya Air Force until the 1st of August 1982 attempted coup, following which they were arrested for allegedly participating in the attempted coup. They further claim to have been imprisoned for periods spanning 6 months to several years and thereafter unlawfully and unconstitutionally dismissed from the Kenya Air Force without compensation, despite not having been involved in the attempted coup. Honourable members, the petitioners state that they pursued justice through the High Court of Kenya, and the courts granted them varying awards on different dates from 2012 onwards. The petitioners aver that they obtained certificates of decreased taxation and orders against the government to be paid in the year 2017. In spite of the fact that the Principal Secretary for Defense saw an affidavit on oath averring that the ministry had factored the decretal amounts in the 2017-2018 budget to settle the compensation, the orders remain unheeded several years later. They are therefore worried that since most of their colleagues are senior citizens, aged above 65 years, have no capacity to fend for themselves, any further delay to be compensated will worsen their deteriorating conditions of life. Honourable members, the petitioners are therefore praying that the National Assembly allocates to the Ministry of Defense such funds necessary in the 2021-2022 financial year for compensation and settlement of decretal debts and the interest accrued thereof to the ex-Kenya Air Force officers who were dismissed in 1982. Honourable members, having determined that the matters raised by the petitioners are well within the authority of this House, I order that pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 227, the petition be committed to the Budget and Appropriations Committee. The committee is required to consider the petition and report its findings to the House and the petitioners in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 227, subsection 2. The committee may also consider proposing necessary adjustments to the 2021-2022 budget for the relevant vote or votes so as to accommodate the prayers of the petitioners should they find them being capable of being accommodated. I thank you, honourable members. Next. Honourable members, in view of the business ahead, I will dispense with the requirement to allow members to comment for 30 minutes on that petition. So the petition will just start committed to the Committee on Budget. Let's proceed.
Order number 5, papers.
Leader of Majority Party.
Honourable Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Thursday, June the 10th, 2021, in the afternoon sitting. Number 1, the reports on the Auditor General and financial statement for the Kenya Veterinary Vaccines Production Institute for the year ended 30th of June, 2015, 2017, and 2018, and the certificates therein. Number 2, the reports of the Auditor General and financial statements in respect to the following institutions for the year ended 30th of June, 2020, and the certificates therein. The State Department for Youth Affairs, the Public Service Commission, the State Department for Development of the Arid and Semi-Arid Lands, ASALS, the National Government Constituencies Development Fund Board, development revenue statements from the National Treasury, revenue statements of the Government Investment and Public Enterprises from the National Treasury, the East Africa Tourist Visa Collection Account from the National Treasury, the Government Clearing Agency Fund, the National Exchequer Account from the National Treasury, Office of the Controller of Budget Mortgage Fund, Stores and Services Fund from the State Department of Public Works, Consolidated Fund Services, Pension and Gratuities from the National Treasury, Mechanical and Transport Fund from the National Youth Service, and the State Department for Public Works. Lastly, number 3, the County Government Budget Implementation Review Report for the first 9 months of the financial year 2020-2021. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 7, questions and statements.
First segment, questions. The first question is by the member for Kajiado North, the Honorable Joseph Manje.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, Speaker. My question is to the CS ICT Innovation and Youth. The first part, could the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on the status of implementation of the Kenya National Addressing System under the Communication Authority, which involves physical and electronic naming and numbering of buildings and streets? 2, what urgent measures is the ministry taking to ensure that institutionalization of the national addressing system is expedited? Thank you, Chair. Speaker.
The question will be replying to before the Departmental Committee on Communication, Information and Innovation. Next question by the member for Stare, the Honorable Charles Jagua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question 182 of 2021, directed to the Cabinet Secretary for Interior and Coordination of National Government. 1, could the Cabinet Secretary provide a status report on the investigations into an accident that occurred on 5th May 2021 near Pangani Girls High School along Juja Road involving an ambulance registration number KCY 015S belonging to Medhill Group of Hospitals, which led to death of Peter Odur of National ID 2176-4388. 2, could the Cabinet Secretary undertake to ensure that the matter will be fully investigated with a view of ensuring justice for the victims and compensation for the life lost? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, question will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Administration and National Security. Last question by the member for Saboti, Honorable Caleb Amisi. He had indicated that he had given authority to the Honorable Jagua to ask on his behalf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of Honorable Caleb Amisi to ask question 183 of 2021 to the Cabinet Secretary for Defense. 1, could the Cabinet Secretary elaborate the steps the ministry is taking, if any, to ensure the successful rescue of Gershon W. Wasike, a member of the Kenyan Defense Forces, KDF number 64809, who was taken hostage in 2006 by the Al-Shabaab terror group in Somalia? 2, could the Cabinet Secretary explain the government policy regarding the rescue of Kenya prisoners of war? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It's 2016, not 2006. 2016. That's what it reads. Very well, the question will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Defense and Foreign Relations. I can see somebody who has placed an intervention. Member for Dagoretti South, what's your intervention about?
Mr. Speaker, this is unintended. Thank you very much.
Very well. Member for Moya, what's your intervention about?
Honorable Speaker, there could be a problem with the system because my gadget here doesn't show anything. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Any other intervention? Whether intended or unintended? Member for Garissa, is it intended or unintended?
Speaker, mine is intended. Speaker, 2.5 months ago, I seek a statement from the chairperson of Energy Committee on the matter of independent power producers and their role in the high electricity bill. Speaker, I'm yet to get a reply from the committee, and Speaker, I urge you to direct that in our next sitting on Tuesday, the committee should furnish the House with all the information, because, Speaker, I asked for a written statement. But the statement I got, Speaker, had 5 fundamental questions. And 2 of the questions, and I'm sure the clerk has a copy of that statement, 2 of the questions, question 4 and 5, the committee asked that I should go to court and get a court order so that the minister can furnish me with the specific directors of the companies that provide power to KPLC, 13 of them, and secondly, they will not avail the contractual obligation showing how much each company was paid per month. And Mr. Speaker, in line with Article 125 of the Constitution and the Powers and Privilege Act and Article 35 of the Constitution on access to information, a committee of this House, when it demands for information from the executive or any other arm of government, that information must be provided. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a matter of national interest. And when I saw that statement, Mr. Speaker, the same evening, the executive formed a task force, in a very unusual manner. But I am, as a member of parliament, I am under obligation to provide to the people of Kenya the cost of power vis-a-vis what this independent power produces, private independent power producers. How much do they charge KPLC, and how much does that translate to the price ordinary citizens and investors pay? So, Mr. Speaker, I really want you to use your powers to ask the chair of the Energy Committee to supply me with the information so that the House, together with the House, we can interrogate the matter, Mr. Speaker. It is now 2 months.
Where's the chair of the particular committee on energy? The member for Nakuru Town East, the Honorable Gekaria, who deputizes him? Who's the vice chair? As you can see, both the chairperson, the vice chairperson are absent, not desiring to be present on this momentous day. I don't know how can they be absent? How can the chairperson be absent on a day like today, surely? Maybe but they should have come here. The House was sitting yesterday, so they cannot be said to be on the way from their villages. The member who is raising his hand up there, would you want to speak on behalf of the chairperson or on behalf of the vice chair or on your own behalf? Is that Honorable Osman? What? Okay. Very well, very well. Your concerns are noted, and the leader majority will convey that message, but let them bring the statement on Tuesday. It has taken too long. I can see an intervention from the member for Uriri. Honorable Nyamita.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the 13th of May, I did ask a question directed to the Departmental Committee on Defense and Foreign Relations. My question had to do with compensation of one of their ex-members of the Kenya Defense Forces who had not been compensated for now over 25 years. And Mr. Speaker, you directed that question and the chair then, I think Honorable Kateo Lemetito, agreed to bring feedback to this House in 2 weeks. Mr. Speaker, to date, we are heading towards the end of June, and we have not heard from them. They have not come back to this House to even come and seek for additional time. I'm seeking your intervention so that they probably fast-track this, because the people on whose behalf I was petitioning are waiting for this feedback.
You want the petition which you have just read out. Perhaps it could be addressed in that petition, is it?
Well, if it could be covered also, because mine was specific and I gave out all the details. So if they could address as probably they are responding to this, I would appreciate it.
Although the question was really not directed to the chairman, it was directed to the minister, the cabinet secretary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I was indeed very glad when you referred that petition to the Budget and Appropriation Committee, because we have, a long list of ex-army officers who are having such claims, as alluded to by the Honorable Nyamita. But Mr. Speaker, it's also good to note that these cases, because they all ended up being in court, from the court martial to the High Court, and High Court actually cleared those officers, awarded them those damages. But when you inquire from the government, especially from the Ministry of Defense, and specifically from the Attorney General Office, they say there is a pending appeal. Government had appealed for such judgment, and there are so many, and they actually collude some sum of money, a lot of money, that were awarded to those ex-officers, ex-army officers. So now going to the Budget Committee, it is the Budget Committee that has got powers in this House to do appropriation. So the case of the Honorable Nyamita, I'm very sure it will be covered there, where the Budget Committee will look into the judgment of the High Court and whether there is any live appeal in the Court of Appeal on the same matter, and then they will make an informed decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, maybe the Honorable Nyamita will can also pursue with the Budget and Appropriations Committee. But certainly, and the Honorable Nyamita say that since he raised the question on the 13th of May, it is now towards the end of June. But certainly, 10th of June cannot be towards the end. It is not towards Honorable Nyamita. 10th of June cannot be towards the end of June. But nevertheless, your concern is noted. Yes, Honorable Nyamita.
Mr. Speaker, whereas I appreciate the feedback from the Chair of Defense and Foreign Relations, I think it would be justice if the committee at least looked into the matter instead of generalizing and saying that I think, in this House, the chair cannot come and say, I think that petition, when we have, they are seized of that very question that I asked. They need to find out the details. If then it requires the intervention of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, Mr. Speaker, where I also sit, then he will bring it. But to just dismiss it without even having the benefit of looking at it, I think we might be directing it to the wrong committee, because mine was not exactly as a petition that you had earlier raised. So I just want to urge that probably they look into it, they find out facts, because it is them who can be able to tell us whether the respective department has lodged an appeal. Instead of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, we will not be in a position to go and check whether, so that is the work of the committee, then they can direct it to.
You can get that. Honorable Katolo Mitito, can you bring on Thursday a specific response as to whether or not, in respect to the question raised by the Honorable Nyamita, whether the state did appeal, and if they did, the status of the appeal for the comfort of the honorable member by Thursday.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Nyamita, my good friend, knows very well that this is a very, very serious committee. From 13th May, we just came back the day before yesterday. We resumed on 8th. And so we haven't really failed to bring it on time, but I will go with your direction, Mr. Speaker. Thursday next week, we will respond to Honorable Nyamita's statement. But I was not really thinking, I'm being told by my good friend here, the member for Kiambu, that I'm not allowed to think. But Mr. Speaker, I am very certain that the end game for all these petitions on ex-army officers is a consolidated petition to be decided by the Budget and Appropriation Committee. But nevertheless, I will respond as directed by you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Nominated member Osotsi, you have an intervention. What is it about?
Mr. Speaker, just like my good friend Honorable Nyamita, I did ask a question here, I think in April, touching on KRA and revenue performance. Mr. Speaker, the question was directed to Finance and Planning Committee. I am concerned because it's taking too long for me to get an answer. So I would seek your intervention so that the committee can invite KRA to come and respond to the issues that I had raised in that question, Mr. Speaker.
Chair of Budget, Honorable Wanga. Finance and Planning.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I'm really surprised by the Honorable Sotsi, because I have been in constant communication with him. He himself came to me, and he told me when we had invited KRA to come and respond, that he was not going to be available to come and listen to the answer to that question, Honorable Speaker. And he asked me to postpone it indefinitely until he's available. So I'm really surprised for the Honorable Sotsi to come and mention this on the floor as if the committee has not moved on the matter. Honorable Speaker, he who comes to equity must come with clean hands. So, Honorable Speaker, I'm really surprised. I invited KRA. KRA were ready to come. Honorable Sotsi approached me. He told me he was not available on the day and that I should postpone it until a date that he is available. I am just waiting for him to come back and tell me when he is available. So, Honorable Speaker, to come and raise the matter here on the floor and to make the committee look incompetent is out of order, Honorable Speaker. I request you, Honorable Speaker, to find him out of order. And he had better just be quiet. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Sotsi, you know, what has been stated by the Chair of Finance is the staff that should see you be thrown out of the chamber, because it is not fair. It's not fair that you can approach the chair of the committee to postpone your question and then come to complain here. Is that so? Because as she says, then your hands will look extremely dirty.
Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear. Yes, indeed, I've been in touch with the Chair of Finance. And yes, at some point, I said I was not going to be available because I was going to be out of town. But I never said that the question should not be asked. So I will be more than willing for the committee to still invite the respondent to respond to the question. So I never said that since I was not available for a particular time, I was not going to be available any other time. Mr. Speaker, I'm available any other time, and I'm keen to get answers to the question.
The same way that you approach the chair to postpone is what you should have done. But to come and raise it here is to put the committee, to cast aspersions actually on the committee that they are sitting on your question. And that's the point. The point being made by the Honorable Wanga is you approached her to postpone the question. And she says she was waiting for you now to go back and tell when it is you are available. Now you come here and start saying that the committee has not responded. Yeah, actually, you should actually apologize to the committee. Honorable Sotsi. Apologize to the committee. Apologize to the committee.
Mr. Speaker, it's very clear that I've been in touch with the Chair of Finance, whom I respect a lot. It's only that at one point I was not available, and I'm sorry for all that confusion. But, Mr. Speaker, through your intervention, I would still request that if opportunity is available, I would be very keen to get responses to my question, Mr. Speaker.
In the same way you approached her, go and approach her to set a date for the question to be answered. I think, honourable members, let's proceed with business. This you can see now, members think is an occasion for, I don't know what's the cause for excitement. Because you can see you may have forgotten because of the long holiday. You see the Honourable Sotsi forgot he is the one who requested for the postponement of the question. Honourable Jaldesa, what's your intervention about?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had earlier pressed an intervention before you apologized. I appreciate it.
Very well. Leader majority. Yeah, he has apologized.
Honourable Speaker, pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order number 44.2a, I rise to give the following statement on behalf of the House Business Committee, which met on Monday, 7th of June, 2021, to prioritize the business for consideration. Honourable Speaker, I wish to officially welcome members back from their media recess that was held from 13th of May, 2021 to 7th of June, 2021. It allowed departmental committees to consider and discuss the budget estimates for the financial year 2021-2022 with the relevant government ministries and state departments and other government institutions according to their respective mandates and make recommendations to the Budget and Appropriations Committee. Honourable Speaker, I'm delighted that Budget and Appropriations Committee has tabled its detailed report for consideration and adoption by this August House in accordance with Standing Order number 235.5, and I wish to commend the committees for their diligence in finalizing their work within the tight timeframes. I'm also happy that committee chairs and members have begun making their contributions on the floor of the House regarding the budget estimates. Honourable Speaker, today we welcome the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning as he makes a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and revenue-raising measures for the government for the fiscal year 2021-2022 in accordance with Standing Orders number 25A and 244C. Honourable Speaker, during the afternoon sitting of Tuesday next week, we shall have the following bills being read the first time. Number one, the Trustees' Perpetual Succession Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 23 of 2021. The Perpetuities and Accumulations Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 24 of 2021. And the Certified Managers Bill, National Assembly Bill number 26 of 2021. Honourable Speaker, we shall also continue consideration of the report on the budget estimates for the financial year 2021-2022 for the third and final allotted day. Once this is concluded, the House shall continue debate on the motion on the report of the Auditor General and the financial statements for the national government for the financial year 2017-2018. Honourable Speaker, members will recall that we amended the calendar of the House to hold evening sittings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays starting from next week until our next recess in July. As such, during the evening session of Tuesday, 15th of June 2021, that is the session beginning from 7 to 9:30 p.m., we have scheduled the following business for consideration. Number one, in the Committee of Supply, in accordance with the procedure provided for in Standing Order number 241. Two, the second reading of the Wakfu Bill, National Assembly Bill number 73 of 2019. And number three, a motion on the report of the Departmental Committee on Finance and National Planning on the inspection visits to ascertain the impact of revenue enhancement initiatives on revenue collection. Honorable Speaker, due to the tightness of the business for the week, I'm informed that there are no questions scheduled for response by Cabinet Secretaries next week. Honorable Speaker, the House Business Committee will reconvene on Tuesday, the 15th of June, 2021, to schedule the business for the rest of the week. I now wish to lay this statement on the table of the House. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Very well. Next order.
Order number 8, the National Government Constituencies Development Fund Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 4 of 2021, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to amend the National Government Constituencies Development Act 2015.
Next.
Order number 9, the Kenya Roads Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 13 of 2021, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to amend the Kenya Roads Act and for connected purposes.
That's all. General, honourable members, this is communication number 27 of 2021, which deals with interruption of business for delivery of the highlights of budget estimates for the financial year 2021-2022. Report of the Budget and Appropriations Committee on the budget estimates for the national government, Parliament, and the judiciary for the financial year 2021-2022. This process will proceed to the Committee of Supply, which will allocate funds to various votes and programs under the three arms of the national government. Ultimately, the process comes to an end upon the passage and enactment of the Annual Appropriations Act, which anchors the respective allocations in law and authorizes the attendant withdrawals from the consolidated fund. Honourable members, as part of this process, Section 40, Subsection 1 of the Public Finance Management Act of 2012, read together with Standing Order 244, paragraph C, requires the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury to make a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and revenue-raising measures of the national government. For this reason, I have shortly been interrupting business of the House to allow the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning to discharge this obligation. Honourable members, before I do so, allow me to recognize the following Cabinet Secretaries who are seated in the Speaker's row for this occasion, being led as of the time we are sitting, Mr. James Macharia, EGH Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Professor Margaret Kobia, EGH Cabinet Secretary for Public Service, Mrs. Cecily Kariuki, Cabinet Secretary for Water, and several other dignitaries. They are welcome to the National Assembly. Honourable members, I also wish to recognize the Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya, Dr. Patrick Njoroge, as well as representatives from the judiciary, led by the Commissioner Evelyn Olwande, who's accompanied by the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, Mrs. Anne Amandi, and other judicial officers. And are pleased they are seated in the diplomatic boxes. Honourable members, seated at the public servants' benches are other distinguished guests from the National Treasury accompanying the Cabinet Secretary this afternoon. They include the Chief Administrative Secretary, National Treasury, the Honourable Nelson Gaishuye, the Chief Administrative Secretary, Planning, Mr. Eric Simiyu Wafuho, and the Principal Secretary, National Treasury, Dr. Julius Muya. Finally, may I also recognize our very own Mrs. Phyllis Macau, the Director of the Parliamentary Budget Office, who is also seated at the public servants' benches. Please join me, members, in welcoming them to the National Assembly this afternoon in our usual manner. Honourable members, paragraph A of Standing Order 255, capital A provides as follows, and I quote, "The Speaker may designate a suitable place in the chamber or at the bar of the House for A, the Cabinet Secretary responsible for finance to make a public pronouncement of the budget policy highlights and revenue-raising measures for the national government as contemplated under the Public Finance Management Act," close the quote. In furtherance of this provision, I have designated a suitable place to the right of Mr. Speaker's seat and adjacent to the public servants' benches to enable the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Planning to discharge his obligation under Section 40 of the Public Finance Management Act 2012 and Standing Order 244C of the National Assembly Standing Orders. In this regard, honourable members, it is now my pleasure to invite the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Planning, the Honourable Ambassador Uko Riatani, to make a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and the revenue-raising measures for the national government for the financial year 2021-2022 and the medium term, not later than 3:15 p.m. Bwana Cabinet Secretary, karibu.
Mr. Speaker, it is once again a privilege for me to present to this Honourable House and the people of Kenya highlights of the budget policy and the revenue-raising measures for the financial year 2021-22. This statement is a fulfillment of the requirement of Section 40 of the Public Finance Management Act and the Standing Order number 241 of the National Assembly. I do this in performing my fiduciary duty to Kenyans. Before I proceed with the rest of my statement, Mr. Speaker, allow me to state that during the preparation of this budget, I had very fruitful engagements with diverse stakeholders and received valuable feedback. The breadth of the stakeholders spanned from the government ministries, departments and agencies, county government, committees of this House, development partners, private sector, and Kenyans from all walks of life. I extend my sincere gratitude to them for their views and useful suggestions which inform the priorities of this budget. Mr. Speaker, pressing concerns raised by Kenyans during the consultation process revolved around the impact of COVID-19 and its containment measures. Kenyans were concerned about the high cost of COVID-19 treatment and availability of vaccines, in addition to food security, high cost of living, and employment levels among the youth. In addition, Kenya has raised concerns about the general levels of poverty and inequality, as well as increased public debt. Mr. Speaker, at the outset, I wish to assure Kenyans that these concerns have been considered, and I will be elaborating specific interventions later in this statement. Mr. Speaker, as you recall, following the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic in March last year, the government instituted containment measures to curb the spread of the virus and save lives. To cushion Kenyans and businesses, the government rolled out specific fiscal interventions, including reduction of pay-as-you-earn and corporate tax from 30 to 25%, value-added tax from 16 to 14%, and turnover tax from 3 to 1%. The government also offered 100% tax relief to Kenyans earning below Kenya shilling 24,000 per month. In addition, the government enhanced cash transfer allocations to the vulnerable segment of the society, including the emerging urban vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, the government further implemented various monetary policy measures to enhance access to credit by the private sector. These included a reduction of the central bank rate from 8.25 to 7% and lowering of the cash reserve ratio from 5.2 to 4.2%, thereby injecting an additional shilling 35 billion to the money market. Further, during this period, commercial banks were allowed flexibility with regard to requirements for loan classification and provisioning. Mr. Speaker, to spur economic activities in the country, the government implemented a comprehensive economic stimulus program targeting activities in infrastructure, education, health, business liquidity, agriculture and food security, tourism, manufacturing, environment, water and sanitation. Mr. Speaker, in spite of these interventions, a lot remains to be done in order to deal with the challenges of unemployment among our youth, as well as high poverty and income inequality levels that have been aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our rallying call in this year's budget is therefore job creation through continued and sustained economic growth. To strengthen this position, we shall implement comprehensive economic recovery strategy that will expand economic activities and address these challenges. Mr. Speaker, the private sector remains key to employment creation and poverty reduction in the country. In order to expand the scope and pace of policy interventions and enhance access to credit by businesses, the government established the Credit Guarantee Scheme to de-risk lending to the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, the plight of the vulnerable in our society, particularly the emerging urban vulnerable, remains a key concern for our government. In order to cushion this particular group, the government will enhance cash transfer allocations and institute other targeted interventions in this budget. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered one of the worst health and economic crises of our time. The pandemic overstretched our health systems, and in line with the advisory of the World Health Organization, the government implemented appropriate interventions to save lives. The response has undoubtedly strengthened our healthcare system through provisioning of necessary medical supplies, installation of modern equipment, and deployment of more health personnel. In addition, in March 2021, the government launched the National COVID-19 Vaccination Program, initially targeting the frontline workers and other highly vulnerable groups. As at end of May 2021, about 1 million persons had received the first vaccine dose. In order to facilitate further rollout of vaccines to create herd immunity, we propose to allocate Kenya shilling 14.3 billion in the financial 2021-22. This is in addition to Kenya shilling 7.6 billion appropriated in the current budget. Mr. Speaker, to enhance access to affordable medical and equipment for management of COVID-19 and chronic diseases, I will later in this statement be proposing tax relief measures on the various pharmaceutical products and medical equipment. Mr. Speaker, the containment measures instituted by the government to stem the spread of the virus and save lives adversely affected economic activities and revenue performance. To stimulate economic activities and enhance government's ability to respond, we prioritize health and social expenditures and formulated an economic recovery strategy program that targeted, first, enhancing our ability to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, reducing debt vulnerabilities through a revenue-driven fiscal consolidation with a view to stabilizing debt to GDP ratio over the medium term. Third, implementing targeted policy, legal and institutional reforms, while at the same time addressing vulnerabilities in the state-owned enterprises worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. And fourth, strengthening the monetary policy framework and financial stability. Mr. Speaker, under this program, we plan to reduce the level of fiscal deficit from 8.7% of GDP in the current budget to 7.5% of GDP in the financial 2021-22, and further to 3.6% of GDP in the financial year 2024-25. This will be a 5.1% reduction in fiscal deficit over the next 4 years, thereby slowing the annual growth of debt. Upon our request, this economic recovery program is supported by multilateral and bilateral development partners, with the International Monetary Fund providing financial resources amounting to US dollars 2.34 billion over the next 3 years. Further, Mr. Speaker, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the G20 countries extended support to developing countries by offering debt service suspension under the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative framework. The fiscal space created under this initiative is to increase social, health, and economic spending in response to the COVID-19 crisis. Kenya has benefited from this initiative through expansion of health and social services. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, Kenya welcomes the initiatives under the recent French African Summit that agreed to, among others, increase funding through the IMF special drawing rights to African states to support economic recovery, extension of the G20 debt service suspension, and facilitate the manufacture of vaccines in Africa. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight the economic policy context in which this budget has been prepared. Mr. Speaker, this year's budget has been prepared against a backdrop of projected global economic recovery. This is despite the emergence of COVID-19 variant, occasioning reintroduction of containment measures to further stem spread of the virus. The projected recovery reflects additional fiscal support in a few large economies and monetary easing that further uplifts the economic outlook. This outlook is further supported by the ongoing vaccinations, which is expected to pick up in the second half of 2021. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, the global economy is projected to grow by 6% in 2021, from a contraction of 3.3% in 2020. Mr. Speaker, closer home, due to improved exports and commodity prices, economic growth in the sub-Saharan Africa region is projected to expand by 3.4% in 2021 from a contraction of 1.9% in 2020. This growth will also be supported by recovery in both private consumption and investment as the economies reopen. Mr. Speaker, like the rest of the world, our economy was not spared from the adverse impact of the pandemic. In addition, the Kenyan economy experienced two other shocks. One, the invasion of the desert locusts that damaged crops, and two, floods that caused loss of lives and livelihoods, displacement of people, and destruction of infrastructure. Given the impact of these shocks, economic growth for 2020 declined to 0.6% from 5.4% in 2019. Mr. Speaker, economic growth is expected to rebound to 6.6% in 2021. This recovery reflects the lower base of 2020, when most services sectors were adversely affected by the closure of the economy, recording negative growth. The outlook in 2021 will be reinforced by the prevailing stable macroeconomic environment and the ongoing implementation of the strategic priorities of government under the Big Four agenda and economic recovery strategy. Weather conditions are expected to be favorable, supporting agricultural output. As a result, export of goods and services will expand as global demand normalizes. Over the medium term, the economy is expected to remain resilient and grow at a rate above 6.1%. Mr. Speaker, This growth outlook is affirmed by the recent surveys by the Monetary Policy Committee, revealing a general optimism about economic growth prospects. In addition, the recent IMF mission to Kenya noted that economic recovery is underway and estimates economic growth consistent with our projections. Mr. Speaker, to support this growth outlook, we shall continue to maintain macroeconomic stability. Inflation, which stood at 5.9% in May 2021, is expected to remain within the target range of 5%, with a margin of 2.5 on either side, supported by prudent fiscal and monetary policies. Interest rates will be expected to remain low and stable, supporting growth of private sector credit. The balance of payments is also expected to be strong, with the current account balance projected to remain at 5.2% of GDP. Further, the rebound in horticulture and tea exports, as well as increased inflows of remittances, will support build-up of adequate levels of official foreign exchange reserves, creating buffers against short-term shocks in the foreign exchange market. Mr. Speaker, the affirmation of the economic outlook may be affected by emerging domestic and external risks. The emergence of new COVID-19 variants could lead to reinstatement of containment measures, disrupting, among others, trade and tourism. In addition, Mr. Speaker, adverse weather conditions could lead to low agricultural output. Further, increased public expenditure pressures, particularly wage demands, could put a strain to the fiscal space. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to monitor these developments and take appropriate policy interventions to safeguard the economy where they risk to materialize. Mr. Speaker, having outlined the economic policy context for this budget, we have carefully reflected on a theme that will resonate with our strategies to protect lives and livelihoods during this period of COVID-19, cushion the vulnerable, and support economic recovery for employment creation and poverty reduction. In this respect, we have framed the theme for this budget as Building Back Better, a strategy for resilient and sustainable economic recovery and inclusive growth. Mr. Speaker, the next section of my statement will give highlights of the policy priorities of the government and the strategy for economic recovery. I will later provide highlights of the fiscal framework underpinning the budget, spending priorities, and the proposed tax policy measures. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of Big Four agenda remains a high priority and critical to the economic recovery. In this regard, the government will fast-track implementation of programs and projects under the Big Four agenda to enhance food and nutritional security, achieve universal health care, provide affordable housing, and support growth of manufacturing sector for job creation. Mr. Speaker, the government will also undertake the following targeted strategic interventions to achieve a resilient and sustainable economic recovery. First, maintain a macroeconomic stability and enhance security to foster a secure and conducive business environment and security of Kenyans and their properties. Second, scale up development of critical infrastructure in the country such as roads, rail, energy, and water to reduce the cost of doing business and ease movement of people and goods, as well as promote competitiveness. Third, enhance investment in key economic sectors for broad-based sustainable recovery by promoting agricultural transformation, growth in manufacturing, environmental conservation and water supply, stimulating tourism recovery, and sustainable land use and management. Fourth, expand access to quality social services in health, education, and appropriate social safety nets for the vulnerable population. Fifth, support the youth, women, and persons living with disability through government-funded empowerment programs that leverages on partnerships with the private sector organization. Sixth, support county government through transfer of shareable revenues to strengthen their systems and capacity in service delivery. And lastly, implement various policy, legal, and institutional reforms to enhance efficiency of public service delivery. Mr. Speaker, following the outbreak of the pandemic, we implemented the economic stimulus program to support economic activities and mitigate the adverse impact of the pandemic on Kenyans and businesses. The achievement of the program includes: 1, creation of 100,000 jobs opportunities for the youth under the Kazi Mtani initiative, and 5,500 community scouts in wildlife conservation areas across the 47 counties. 2, improvement of education outcomes through construction of additional classrooms in secondary schools, procurement of locally fabricated desks for both primary and secondary schools, and recruitment of 4,000 and 8,000 primary and secondary school intern teachers, respectively. 3, enhancement of healthcare system capacity by recruiting 5,000 diploma and certificate level healthcare workers for 1 year under the universal health coverage. 4, enhancement of liquidity to businesses through payment of VAT refunds of shilling 10 billion and clearance of pending bills of shilling 13.1 billion. 5, de-risking of lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises by providing shilling 3 billion to the Credit Guarantee Scheme as a seed capital. And 6, cushioning the vulnerable, particularly the emerging urban vulnerable, with an additional shilling 10 billion to the cash transfer program. Mr. Speaker, building on the success of the aforementioned interventions, the government is now set to implement an elaborate economic recovery strategy that aims to reposition the economy on an inclusive and sustainable growth trajectory. The strategy seeks to enhance resource mobilization to ensure sustainable funding of our development programs from diverse sources, including public-private partnership and lease financing. The strategy will also support the role of the private sector in the economy and further facilitate credit access by micro, small, and medium enterprises through the Credit Guarantee Scheme. Under the strategy, the government will upscale investment in ICT and digital infrastructure in order to facilitate e-commerce and efficient delivery of public services. The government shall also promote local production processes and domestic supply value chains and strengthen social protection through targeted policy interventions and programs. Mr. Speaker, undoubtedly, successful implementation of this strategy will enable us realize the aspired economic growth, create employment, and narrow income inequalities. I will later in this statement propose budget allocations to the government priority areas. Mr. Speaker, besides the achievements under the economic stimulus program, the ongoing key strategic interventions of government, as well as sustained policy reforms over the years, have greatly transformed the economy and improved the welfare of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight some of the key achievements realized from these investments and reforms. Mr. Speaker, at the macroeconomic level, our prudent fiscal, monetary, and financial policies have resulted into fast, strong economic growth that averaged at 5.6% between 2013 and 2019. However, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic slowed growth in the year 2020. The GDP per capita increased by an impressive 80.4% from shilling 113,000 in 2013 to shilling 204,000 in 2019. New jobs created by both the formal and the informal sector increased by 12%, from 755,000 in 2013 to 846,000 in 2019. Second, inflation rate has remained within target range, averaging 6.1%. Third, interest rates have declined while credit to the private sector increased. Lending rates declined from 17.3% in 2013 to 12% in 2020, while the central bank rate declined from 8.5% in 2013 to 7% in 2020. As a result, credit to the private sector increased from shilling 1.5 trillion in 2013 to shilling 2.8 trillion in 2020. Fourth, the current account deficit improved from 8.8% of GDP in 2013 to 4.7% of GDP in 2020, supporting the stability of the foreign exchange market. And fifth, revenue collection, including appropriation in aid, doubled from shilling 900 billion in the financial 2013-2014 to an estimated shilling 1.8 trillion in the financial 2020-21. Mr. Speaker, our investment in the expansion of road networks, railways, seaports, airports, and energy has enhanced domestic and regional connectivity, boosted rural productivity, and reduced urban congestion. These investments include: 1, the standard gauge railway and the urban commuter rail in Nairobi, the ongoing rehabilitation of meter gauge railway lines along various routes, including Nairobi-Nanyuki and Nakuru-Kisumu-Butere. 2, the recently launched first batch in Lamu Port as a critical pillar of the Lapsset corridor. Our focus to make Lamu a free port for both domestic and transshipment purposes. In addition, the government is establishing a disease-free zone in Lamu to support export of live animals and processed meat. 3, the rehabilitation and subsequent use of Kisumu Port will enhance efficiency in regional trade. And 4, expansion in energy generation and connectivity, with over 7.5 million households today connected to electricity compared to 2.3 million households in 2013. Mr. Speaker, the government has provided various incentives at our ports, including exempting the fuel supply to the shipping lines from import and excise duty, VAT, as well as railway development levy and import declaration fees. To further attract more ships to our ports, particularly to the recently launched Lamu Port, the government will review the arrangements on fueling by vessels calling at the Kenyan ports, with a view to allowing ship-to-ship refueling and establishment of fuel bunker facilities. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the various reforms in the agricultural sector, we focus on the livestock sector by reviving the Kenya Meat Commission. We shall set up a meat processing plant in Lamu to provide ready market for livestock, increase income to farmers, and enhance the meat value chain. Mr. Speaker, we also focused on increasing fish production by refurbishing Liwatoni Fishing Complex and setting up a new fish processing plant in Lamu. This will promote exports and increase income for the local fishermen. Mr. Speaker, in order to improve access to land as a factor for development, we have stepped up investment in the sector and rolled out ambitious national program of land titling and digitization of land records. Mr. Speaker, tea and coffee subsectors provide livelihoods to millions of Kenyans. Despite its contribution, the foreign exchange earnings, the returns to farmers have been declining due to low productivity, high input cost, low levels of value addition, and weak regulatory and institutional framework. Under the ongoing reforms in the coffee and tea sectors, I'll be proposing further measures to enhance competitiveness of these subsectors. With regard to manufacturing, Mr. Speaker, the government has revived and transformed textile, leather, and automobile industries, which have in turn created jobs for our youth. The full operationalization of special economic zones in Dongokundu, Naivasha, and Kisumu will support local industries, industrial activities, and unlock additional employment opportunities. Mr. Speaker, the government over the years has supported local assembly of motor vehicles and motorcycles by providing various tax incentives. This includes removal of excise duty on locally assembled motor vehicles, duty-free importation of complete knockdown kits, and reduced corporate tax from 30 to 15% for the first 5 years of operation. I am pleased to note that the industry has responded positively to these interventions, and to date, we have approved 13 motor vehicle and 17 motorcycle assemblers. These local assemblers have created employment opportunities while also saving the country substantial foreign exchange. Mr. Speaker, whereas assembly of commercial vehicles have registered tremendous growth, the passenger category of motor vehicles remains underdeveloped. This category is still dominated by imported used vehicles, comprising over 70% of passenger vehicles, which is largely attributed to the high cost of assembly. In this regard, the government is working on a framework to support the assembly of affordable passenger vehicles. Further, the government, in consultation with the stakeholders, is in the final stages of instituting comprehensive policy and administrative reforms to fully entrench local assembly of motor vehicles and motorcycles. Mr. Speaker, while we have made tremendous progress as a nation, we remain alert to the structural constraints that impede the pace of economic development, aware that a resilient and sustainable economic recovery is indeed predicated on timely implementation of appropriate policy, legal, and institutional reforms, I propose the following interventions to improve the business environment, increase efficiency in public service delivery, and strengthen accountability and transparency in public finance management. On procurement, Mr. Speaker, this House approved the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Regulation 2020 that came into effect in July 2020. With this regulation, it's now easier for procuring entities to meet the specified requirements of bilateral and multilateral agreements on technology and knowledge transfer, local content, and employment quotas, among others. For smooth implementation of the regulations, we have conducted capacity building in all 47 counties. I therefore direct procuring entities to fully comply with these regulations. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure efficiency in procurement process and facilitate access by micro, small, and medium enterprises, the government has reviewed consolidation policy on procurement of ICT equipment and related services. In this regard, procurement of ICT equipment and related services will be decentralized to various ministries, departments, and agencies with effect from 1st July 2021. Mr. Speaker, last year, we began the process of automating public procurement through an end-to-end electronic procurement system. So far, we have developed an implementation strategy that re-engineers all public procurement processes, including functional and technical requirements. In order to actualize this initiative, 31st December 2021 will be the final date for rolling out the electronic government procurement system and therefore discontinuation of the manual procurement processes. In this regard, the government will realize savings as a result of greater efficiency, reduce operational costs, enhance transparency and accountability through increased bidding participation. Mr. Speaker, to support our local contractors and undertake construction of infrastructure projects, we have proposed changes to the contracting framework through the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Bill 2020. The bill before this House proposes, among others, to allow award of contract to multiple bidders. This indeed will support local firms and accelerate the delivery of services. Mr. Speaker, given the prevailing business environment due to the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic, there's an urgent need to evaluate the financial position and governance of key state corporations and institutions. It is in this respect that the government is exploring targeted reforms to strengthen these institutions, including public universities. Mr. Speaker, in the interim, the government provided financial support to strategic institutions, including Kenya Airways, Kenya Power and Lighting Company, and Postal Corporations of Kenya, which were indeed in dire need of cash to meet critical obligations. Mr. Speaker, we have developed a robust information management system to strengthen the statutory role of the National Treasury in financial and operational oversight, as well as the financial risk analysis for state corporations. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that the government introduced cost sharing in public universities in the year 1991. At that time, government funding to public universities per year was set at Kenya shilling 120,000 per student. Of this, government capitation per student was Kenya shilling 70,000, while students contributed Kenya shilling 50,000 through loan funding from Higher Education Loans Board, out of which Kenya shilling 16,000 catered for tuition fees. This is less than half of tuition fees paid currently by students in various colleges of technical and vocational education and training institutions. The ideal cost of training a student in a university has increased from Kenya shilling 120,000 to about Kenya shilling 200,000 per year, and therefore the prevailing funding arrangement introduced in 1991 is unsustainable. Under the current arrangement, universities have not only experienced financial constraints, but have also been unable to continuously honor their statutory obligations. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure sustainability and self-reliance of public universities, the Ministry of Education is expected to engage stakeholders beginning July 2021 with a view to addressing this matter. Mr. Speaker, delays in payment of pending bills to businesses who provide services to both national and county government has affected liquidity and operation of these entities. In a number of cases, This has led to closure of businesses and affected livelihoods of the suppliers. Though progress was made in settlement of these bills by the national government, we still have challenges with the county government that still owe various suppliers huge amounts. In this regard, I direct government ministries, departments and agencies and the county governments to clear all their pending bills by 30th June 2021. Mr. Speaker, I urge the House to support our efforts towards enforcing compliance in payment of all verified pending bills by the county government by backing our proposal under Article 225 of the Constitution of Kenya to temporarily stop transfers to county government that persistently fail to comply with the directive to clear pending bills. Mr. Speaker, the financial sector has remained stable and continued to make significant contributions to the economic growth. Our commercial banks continue to expand their businesses to the neighboring markets, including recent acquisitions in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Uganda. The continued regional expansion will leverage on the trade and investment opportunities under the African Continental Free Trade Area. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, the Kenyan banking sector continued on its transformation journey that commenced 5 years ago, where the key pillar of the journey has been the strengthening of banks' business models, governance frameworks, and entrenching customer centricity in the operations. Mr. Speaker, at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020, the banking sector moved quickly to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on staff, customers, and the public and instituted emergency measures to support business continuity, use of digital channels to mitigate COVID-19 infection risk, enhance liquidity to businesses, as well as facilitate compliance with health and safety protocols. As a result, banks continue to provide uninterrupted banking services to customers mainly through digital channels. Mr. Speaker, over the last 1 year, more than 54% of the bank loans, equivalent to Kenyan shillings 1.7 trillion, were restructured to enable borrowers navigate through the hard time due to the pandemic. As we move to the recovery phase, the banking sector will be expected to play a pivotal role in supporting the recovery of enterprises. Mr. Speaker, to spur economic recovery, additional capital and investments are required. In this regard, the recently established Nairobi International Financial Center Authority will play an important role and is expected to publish, before end of December 2021, a framework for attracting investments and innovative financial services into our economy and the region. Mr. Speaker, the high cost of mortgages, land acquisition, and housing unit has limited access to affordable housing. Nevertheless, government interventions are beginning to yield the desired results for affordable housing. Significant progress has been made to enhance efficiency, transparency, and certainty in land matters by re-engineering the land registration processes, digitization of land records, and implementation of the Sectional Properties Act. The government is also in the process of streamlining and simplifying the legal and regulatory process governing the housing sector and providing basic infrastructure services to developers. Further, the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is supporting the growth of residential housing market in Kenya by providing long-term funding to the mortgage lenders in order to increase affordability of mortgage loans to Kenyans. As of December 2020, Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company had refinanced 1,400 affordable housing loans worth shilling 2.75 billion. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is scheduled to issue an infrastructure bond by October 2021 to raise additional financing for its affordable housing finance objective. Consequently, the company plans to issue green bonds to finance climate-friendly housing projects. Mr. Speaker, during the current financial year, the government operationalized the credit guarantee scheme by providing seed capital of 3 billion to de-risk lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises. To this effect, the National Treasury signed credit guarantee agreements with 7 commercial banks who have now rolled out credit to micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, to further promote access to affordable credit by micro, small, and medium enterprises, the government has committed to progressively raise the capital to Kenyan shilling 10 billion. In this budget, I propose to allocate an additional Kenyan shilling 2 billion to the scheme. Mr. Speaker, alongside the credit guarantee scheme, on account of improved business environment, the private sector has rolled out other innovative credit products targeting micro, small, and medium enterprises. Through these innovations, the banking sector had disbursed over shilling 20.8 billion to micro, small, and medium enterprises, equivalent to 0.7% of total gross loans by end of April 2021. Mr. Speaker, in order to unlock the full potential of digital lenders, the government has, through the Central Bank of Kenya Amendment Bill 2021, proposed to provide for licensing of digital credit service providers. This bill has been submitted to this House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, capital markets play a critical role of channeling national savings and foreign capital inflows into the productive sectors. In order to enhance inclusivity and access to investment opportunities in the capital markets, I propose to amend the Central Depository Act to allow for opening of omnibus investment accounts by persons investing on behalf of others in the securities market. This will allow investment by individuals as well as collective investment by groups. Further, to improve efficiency in our capital markets and ensure fair administrative actions by the Capital Markets Authority, I propose to amend the Capital Markets Act to enable the Capital Markets Tribunal to hear and determine any appeal within 90 days. Mr. Speaker, following the Kenya Bankers Association and other industry players, we shall establish an electronic over-the-counter secondary market platform for government securities. This platform will help in deepening our domestic debt market, improve pricing efficiency and transparency in securities trading, thereby lowering yields and cost of credit in the economy. We expect the operations of the over-the-counter to be in place by June 2022. Mr. Speaker, the defined benefit pension scheme for civil servants, teachers, and disciplined forces has constrained growth of pension savings and also exerted fiscal pressure on government. In order to address these twin problems, the government on 1st of January 2021 rolled out the much-awaited public service superannuation scheme that covers civil servants, teachers, and the disciplined forces aged below 45 years at the commencement of the scheme, with an option for those over 45 years to join if they elect to do so. As of April 2021, a total of 340,318 public servants had indeed joined the scheme. Mr. Speaker, in the past, the processing of payment of pension benefits to retired public servants has neither been efficient nor timely, thus denying senior citizens regular incomes. To address this, National Treasury has carried out targeted reforms, including systems reengineering and the provision of real-time pension services in all the Huduma centers countrywide. I am pleased to note that, as a result of these interventions, the cumulative pension payments and pension file process increased by 40% by 31st May 2021 compared to the previous year. We expect further improvement with the planned implementation of pensions management information system late in the year. Mr. Speaker, given the disparities in the design of the various existing pension schemes and the attendant laws, it has become necessary that these laws be harmonized, hence the need for establishment of one national retirement policy. The policy currently under development seeks to achieve comprehensive pension coverage across formal and informal sectors so as to protect the interests of beneficiaries and rights of pension contributors. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I shall be publishing the policy by December 2021. Mr. Speaker, further, to enhance good governance and improve accountability and transparency in the management of retirement benefit schemes, I propose to amend the Retirement Benefits Act to provide for the registration and regulation of corporate trustees that provide services to pension schemes. Mr. Speaker, our retired citizens have continued to experience challenges in accessing Medicare. For this reason, we have developed post-retirement medical regulations to allow members to make additional voluntary contributions to a medical fund. This will enable retirees access the funds at the retirement or transfer a portion of it to a medical insurance provider. However, the existing regulations exclude post-retirement medical funds established under irrevocable trust by employers and service providers outside the retirement benefit scheme, popularly known as the standalone post-retirement medical funds. These funds have remained unregulated, thus adversely exposing members' funds. As such, I propose to amend the Retirement Benefits Act to provide for regulation of these funds. Mr. Speaker, majority of Kenyans in the informal sector are not covered by any pension scheme, making them vulnerable during old age. To address this, I undertook last year to establish a national informal sector pension scheme with a sustainable model that combines long-term savings with short-term needs, targeting the more than 15 million in the informal sector workers who have been excluded from the current pension arrangement. To this effect, I wish to report that necessary instruments to operationalize the scheme, including trust deeds and rules, business plan, and investment policy, have been prepared. We intend to roll out this scheme in the next financial year. Mr. Speaker, to reinforce realization of affordable housing, last year, we amended the Retirement Benefits Act and mortgage regulations to allow members to use part of their accumulated benefits to purchase residential houses. This will support members of retirement benefit schemes to own homes. In this budget, I propose to amend the mortgage regulations to allow members to utilize up to 40% or maximum of shilling 7 million of their accrued benefits to purchase a house under tenant purchase basis by their pension scheme. Mr. Speaker, currently, foreign insurance brokers are excluded from the definition of brokers under the Insurance Act, thereby making them operate in the country without any controls, thus putting insurance and policyholders at risk. To address this, I propose to amend the Insurance Act to provide for the regulation of foreign insurance brokers. Mr. Speaker, classes of long-term insurance business were amended in 2009 to align with modern classification and bring into perspective the industry's current size. However, the permitted maximum management expenditure was not updated to match the new classification, which causes insurance to either overestimate or underestimate the management expenses, impacting negatively on policyholders. I therefore propose to amend the insurance regulations to provide for the maximum permitted expenditure for each category. Mr. Speaker, to effectively manage disaster response in a more coordinated manner, the government has developed a Disaster Risk Management Bill 2021. The objective of the bill is to better prepare and coordinate our disaster response, mitigation and recovery, as well as build resilience at both national and county levels. Given the urgency to provide a framework for disaster management at both levels of government, I appeal to this House to prioritize consideration of this bill. Mr. Speaker, climate change remains a key concern globally, given its adverse impact on economies. In this regard, government will strengthen capacity of national and county governments to plan, budget, implement, and monitor climate resilience investment. The government has partnered with development partners in the implementation of the proposed financing locally led climate action program and already mobilized funding of shilling 18 billion to support the initiative over the next 5 years. Through this program, we shall strengthen national and county government capacities to manage climate risk through support to the county climate change units, establishment of county climate change fund, and development of climate change laws. Mr. Speaker, the government has also developed and approved the Sovereign Green Bond Framework, identified a portfolio of projects for consideration under the framework, and is prepared to issue the first sovereign green bond to raise capital to finance green projects under the economic recovery strategy. Mr. Speaker, as part of ease of doing business reforms to facilitate trade, we have finalized the development of maritime single window system under the TradeNet system. This will provide an harmonized and simplified ship-to-shore clearance procedures to maritime stakeholders. The maritime single window system will allow shipping agents in Kenya to electronically submit vessel pre-arrival and pre-departure declarations to government agencies. The maritime single window system is expected to replace the current system that is manual, decentralized, with unnecessary lengthy processes that affect the ship turnaround time and increase costs of port to Mombasa. I am pleased to note that this maritime single window system went live on 2nd June 2021. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal policy supporting the financial year 2021-22 and the medium-term budget is designed to support economic recovery and reduce fiscal deficit. The policy aims to mobilize revenues through the ongoing reforms in tax policy and administration. On the expenditure side, the focus will be to rationalize non-priority expenditures from the budget and align the resources to the Big Four agenda and the economic recovery strategy. Mr. Speaker, the execution of this budget for the financial 2020-21, the execution of the budget for the financial 2020-21 has progressed well, albeit with revenue underperformance and elevated expenditure associated with the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic. The shortfalls in revenues reflect weaker business environment and the impact of containment measures adopted in March 2020 following the outbreak of the pandemic. The government then responded to the pandemic by, among others, implementing tax reliefs measures in April 2020. These measures resulted in reduced collection of revenues, adversely impacting the implementation of the budget. Arising from these, the government in January 2021 made reversal of some of the relief measures, resulting in improvement in revenue collection. However, in March 2021, containment measures were introduced as a result of the third wave of the COVID-19. These measures lasted for only 1 month. Mr. Speaker, we remain committed to reducing the level of tax exemptions to create parity of treatment while also raising more revenues to fund social programs and reduce the fiscal deficit. In this budget, I will be proposing selected measures to expand the revenue base. Mr. Speaker, our tax policies are spread across various tax statutes, which are amended every year during the budget process, creating uncertainties in tax legislation. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I have initiated a process of developing a national tax policy framework that will not only enhance administrative efficiency of the tax system, but provide consistency and certainty in tax administration and management of tax expenditure. A draft national tax policy is now ready and will be shared with stakeholders and members of the public in line with the dictates of our Constitution before forwarding to this House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, total revenue, including appropriation in aid and grants for the financial 2021-22 budget, is projected at Kenya shilling 2.1 trillion, equivalent to 17% of GDP. Of this, total revenue is projected at Kenya shilling 2.04 trillion, equivalent to 16% of GDP, an increase in nominal terms from Kenya shilling 1.84 trillion in the financial year 2020-21. Ordinary revenue in the budget is projected at Kenya shilling 1.78 trillion, equivalent to 14.3% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, total expenditure in the financial year 2021-22 budget are projected at Kenya shilling 3.03 trillion, equivalent to 24.5% of GDP, from Kenya shilling 2.89 trillion, equivalent to 25.8% of GDP in the financial 2020-21 budget. Recurrent expenditure will amount to Kenya shilling 2 trillion or 16.2% of GDP. On the other hand, development expenditures, including foreign finance projects, allocations to contingency fund, and conditional transfers to county government are projected at Kenya shilling 669.6 billion. This funding is expected to accelerate completion of ongoing critical infrastructure projects in the country. Mr. Speaker, the expenditures I've outlined in this budget are consistent with those approved in the 2021 budget policy statement. Given the performance of revenue and the available levels of funding from our development partners, it is indeed necessary that we strictly adhere to the expenditure ceilings as presented so as to manage and stabilize public debt. Mr. Speaker, given the projected revenues and grants against the projected expenditure, the fiscal deficit for the financial year 2021-22 budget is projected at Kenyan shilling 929.7 billion, equivalent to 7.5% of GDP. This fiscal deficit is lower than Kenyan shilling 976.2 billion, equivalent to 8.7% of GDP in the financial year 2020-21 budget. The fiscal deficit in 2021-22 budget will be financed through net external financing of Kenyan shilling 271.2 billion, equivalent to 2.2% of GDP, and net domestic financing of Kenyan shilling 658.5 billion, equivalent to 5.3% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, our medium-term consolidation policy aims at reducing fiscal deficit progressively to Kenyan shilling 613.8 billion, equivalent to 3.6% of GDP by the year 2024-25. In this respect, we shall closely monitor the impact of COVID-19 to the economy and accordingly adjust the fiscal plan, including tax measures, to ensure that our development agenda remains sustainably funded. We shall carefully do this while limiting in-house adjustments of the budget for new projects except those of emergency nature. This will enhance certainty in the budget process and improve implementation of government programs and projects while adhering to the fiscal consolidation plan. Mr. Speaker, Kenya's public debt remains sustainable, but the debt carrying capacity has, however, declined. Financing of the fiscal deficit will continue to be strictly guided by the debt and borrowing policy and the annual medium-term debt strategy. Mr. Speaker, the government is implementing reforms to strengthen the institutional arrangements of public debt management by aligning the operations of the Public Debt Management Office to the PFM Act. In this respect, decisions of the day-to-day management and operations of the public debt management shall be undertaken by the Public Debt Management Office to enhance efficiency, strengthen accountability, and transparency. In addition, Mr. Speaker, during this calendar year, we have scheduled a set of debt management operations to lower costs and risk in our public debt portfolio to improve on the country's debt sustainability indicators and sovereign credit rating. I look forward to support of the August House for the amendment of public debt ceiling set in the Public Finance Management Act to enable implementation of debt management operations, including financing of the fiscal deficit. Mr. Speaker, with the desire to meet our development objectives, the gap between development needs and available resources has been expanding. Underscoring the need for alternative financing mechanisms, last year I highlighted the importance of public-private partnership as an option for closing the financing gap. The current Public-Private Partnership Act impairs expeditious financial closure of public-private partnership projects. To this effect, I undertook to transform the public-private partnership framework, which included review of legal, operational, and institutional structures. In this regard, I submitted the Public-Private Partnership Bill 2021 to this House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the highlights of the government spending priorities in the coming financial year. In light of the revenue challenges and significant expenditure demands, spending in the financial 2021-22 will focus on critical areas with the highest impact on the well-being of Kenyans and support economic recovery. Therefore, the total program spending for the financial 2021-22, excluding redemptions, amounts to shilling 3.03 trillion. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue with the implementation of the economic stimulus program in the financial 2021-22. With targets to cushion vulnerable citizens and businesses, particularly those affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We have in this regard set aside shilling 23.1 billion in the financial 2021-22 budget for continuation of this program. Mr. Speaker, out of this, shilling 3 billion is earmarked for youth empowerment and employment creation under the Kazi Mtani program. Shilling 2.6 billion will go towards enhancing liquidity to businesses. Shilling 6.4 billion for improving educational outcomes. Shilling 6.9 billion for improving environment, water and sanitation facilities. Shilling 1.97 billion for improving agriculture and food security, as well as shilling 1.2 billion for recruitment of health workers. Mr. Speaker, I have also set aside shilling 1 billion for Kenya Wildlife Services to employ community scouts. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of priority programs under the Big Four agenda is a critical part to supporting sustainable economic recovery and accelerating employment creation. To realize this, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside shilling 142.1 billion to support the implementation of the Big Four agenda for both drivers and enabler projects. Mr. Speaker, the outbreak and rapid spread of the COVID-19 pandemic necessitated an urgent need to upscale implementation of universal health coverage to all our counties. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 121.1 billion to the health sector to support the various programs aimed at improving health outcomes. Mr. Speaker, of this amount, shilling 47.7 billion will fund activities and programs for the attainment of universal health coverage. Mr. Speaker, specific allocations for the various activities and programs includes shilling 8.7 billion for the Kenya COVID-19 Emergency Response Project, shilling 4.1 billion for free maternity health care, shilling 7.2 billion for the managed equipment services, as well as shilling 1.8 billion to provide medical cover for the elderly and severely disabled persons in our society. To lower cases of HIV, AIDS, and malaria and tuberculosis in the country, shilling 5.8 billion has been set aside. To enhance vaccines and immunization program, we've set aside shilling 3.9 billion. Further, Mr. Speaker, we propose an additional shilling 14.3 billion for purchase of COVID-19 vaccines and related expenditure in the course of the financial 2021-2022. Mr. Speaker, to enhance early diagnosis and management of cancer and reduce the burden of treatment among Kenyans, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 450 million for procurement of cyberknife radiotherapy equipment for Kenyatta University Teaching Referral and Research Hospital. A further shilling 350 million has been set aside for the establishment of 2 cancer centers in Meru and Kakamega. Further, to improve health service delivery, shilling 15.2 billion has been set aside for Kenyatta National Hospital, shilling 11.5 billion for the Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, shilling 7.3 billion for the Kenya Medical Training Centers, shilling 2.8 billion for the Kenya Medical Research Institute, shilling 1.3 billion for the construction of Kenya National Hospital Vans and Pediatric Centers, shilling 863 million for procurement of family planning and reproductive health commodities, and shilling 600 million for procurement of equipment at the National Blood Transfusion Center. Mr. Speaker, affordable housing program is a pragmatic approach to addressing the housing problem, especially in the urban centers. To ensure success of this initiative, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 13.9 billion for the affordable housing program. The proposed allocation includes shilling 3.5 billion to Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company for establishment of the company's capital, as well as for own lending to primary mortgage lenders, shilling 8.2 billion for construction of affordable housing units, as well as shilling 500 million for construction of social housing units. Mr. Speaker, to support the Nairobi Metropolitan Services in reversing urban dignity in Nairobi City County, shilling 100 million has been set aside for the Nairobi Metropolitan Service Improvement Project and shilling 111.2 million for construction of footbridges. Other key allocations to the housing, urban development, and public works sector includes shilling 3.5 billion for the Kenya Informal Settlement Improvement Project Phase 2, Kenya 1 billion for construction of markets, Kenya 1 billion for maintenance of government pool houses, Kenya 750 million for construction of housing units for the National Police and Kenya Prison, Kenya 700 million for the Kenya Urban Program, Kenya 200 million for the Afri-City Summit, and Kenya 445.6 million for the construction and completion of salt project buildings. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya 700 million to support the Nairobi Bus Rapid Transport Project to offer an efficient and time-saving public transport. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to scale up reforms to encourage investments in the manufacturing sector to support and protect local industries. Despite the challenges brought about by COVID-19 pandemic, the fiscal and monetary policy measures that the government implemented significantly cushioned the sector. Mr. Speaker, to further promote local industries, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 20.5 billion under the various implementing ministries, departments, and agencies. Out of these, Kenya shilling 2 billion will go to the Credit Guarantee Scheme to enhance access to affordable credit by micro, small, and medium enterprises in the manufacturing sector. Kenya shilling 500 million will support development of various micro, small, and medium enterprises in Kenya, and Kenya shilling 600 million for provision of finances to micro, small, and medium enterprises through the Kenya Industrial Estate. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside Kenya shilling 8.3 billion for Dongokundu Special Economic Zone, Kenya shilling 350 million for development of the Special Economic Zone, Textile Park in Naivasha, Kenani Leather Industrial Park, and at the River Textile Hub. Kenya shilling 90 million for the Free Port and Industrial Park Special Economic Zone in Mombasa. Other proposed allocations include Kenya shilling 130.2 million for the modernization of Rivertex, Kenya shilling 800 million for access roads to industrial park facilities. Mr. Speaker, in order to maximize the benefits from our cash crops, the government will make further investments towards the revival and enhancement of output. In this respect, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed 210.4 million for coffee industry revitalization, Kenya shilling 59.2 million for modernization of cooperative cotton ginneries, and Kenya shilling 50 million for cotton development as a subsidy and extension support. Mr. Speaker, to equip our youth with essential training and internship opportunities, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 1.4 billion for the Kenya Industrial and Entrepreneurship Project, Kenya shilling 800 million for the Kenya Youth Employment and Opportunities Project, Kenya shilling 448 million for industrial research laboratories, Kenya shilling 199.5 million for constituency industrial development centers. Mr. Speaker, in order to support our aspirations of attaining 100% food and nutrition security, I have set aside Kenya shilling 60 billion to relevant programs in this budget. Out of these, Kenya shilling 7 billion will go to the National Agricultural and Rural Inclusivity Project, Kenya shilling 2.7 billion for the Kenya Cereal Enhancement Program. Kenya shilling 1.8 billion has been proposed for the Emergency Locust Response, Kenya shilling 1.5 billion for the National Value Chain Support Program, Kenya shilling 1.5 billion for the Agricultural Sector Development Support Program 2, Kenya shilling 1.5 billion for the Small Scale Irrigation and Value Addition Project, and Kenya shilling 620 million for Food Security and Crop Diversification Project. Mr. Speaker, to improve livestock production, I propose Kenya shilling 3 billion for free disease holding ground in Lamu. I have also proposed Kenya shilling 488.1 million for the Regional Pastoral Livelihood Resilience Project, Kenya shilling 455 million for the Kenya Livestock Commercialization Program, Kenya shilling 163 million for the Livestock Value Chain Support Project, and Kenya shilling 156.2 million for livestock production under Big Four initiative. To enhance animal disease controls, I have set aside shilling 180 million for sustainable successful entrepreneurship free areas in Kenya, shilling 131.4 million for the disease-free zones program, and shilling 60 million for modernization of foot and mouth disease laboratory and related activities. Mr. Speaker, the realization of the food and nutrition security also relies heavily on the sustainable utilization of the blue economy resources. To promote this, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 3.2 billion for the aquaculture business development project, shilling 3.4 billion for Kenya Marine Fisheries and Socioeconomic Development Project, shilling 2.1 billion for exploitation of living resources under the blue economy, shilling 1 billion for construction of fish processing plant in Lamu, shilling 290 million for coastal fisheries infrastructure development, shilling 326.6 million for rehabilitation of fish landing sites in Lamu, in Lake Victoria, shilling 150 million for aquaculture technology development and innovation transfers, and shilling 195.3 million for development of blue economy initiatives. Mr. Speaker, in order to increase agricultural productivity and enhance resilience to climate change risk in targeted smallholder farming and pastoral communities in Kenya, I have set aside shilling 8.9 billion for the Climate Smart Agricultural Productivity Project, shilling 1.1 billion to enhance drought resilience and sustainable livelihood, shilling 178 million towards ending drought emergencies in Kenya, and in addition, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 529.5 million for the livestock and crop insurance scheme to reduce the vulnerabilities of Kenyan farmers to disease and natural disasters. Mr. Speaker, to ensure legitimacy of land ownership, I have set aside shilling 1.5 billion for processing and registration of title deeds, shilling 600 million for digitization of land registries, and shilling 105 million for construction of land registries. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations include shilling 100 million for revitalization of cotton industry, shilling 300 million for mitigation of fall armyworms, shilling 150 million for establishment of liquid nitrogen plant, shilling 200 million towards the embryo transfer project, and shilling 65 million for construction and refurbishment of the Leather Science Institute. Mr. Speaker, having highlighted the expenditures under the Economic Stimulus Program and the Big Four Agenda Initiative, allow me to turn to other proposed areas of expenditure in this budget that will support our path to sustainable and resilient economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to expand critical infrastructure in roads, rails, sea and airports to create an enabling environment for economic recovery and employment creation. Towards this end, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 182.5 billion, excluding the provisions I have set aside for the Economic Stimulus Program and the Big Four Agenda, to support construction of roads and bridges, as well as their rehabilitation and maintenance. Mr. Speaker, the rehabilitation of the meter gauge railway has improved interconnectivity and reduced traffic congestion on our roads. To continue improving public transport within the Nairobi metropolitan area, I have set aside shilling 1.3 billion for railway metro lines. Further, Mr. Speaker, to expand railway transport to the rest of the country, I have set aside shilling 27.2 billion for phase 2 of the standard gauge railway, shilling 2 billion for construction and rehabilitation of Naivasha Inland Container Depot, Malaba Line, shilling 2 billion for construction and rehabilitation of Riruta, Lenana, Ngong Railway, shilling 1.1 billion to complete rehabilitation of the Nairobi-Nanyuki meter gauge railway line, and shilling 700 million to complete rehabilitation of the Nakuru-Kisumu meter gauge railway. I have also set aside shilling 2 billion for the Kenya National Shipping Yard. Mr. Speaker, to support development of our ports, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 7.5 billion for the construction of the Mombasa Port Development Project, and shilling 7.5 billion for the LAPSET project. Further, I have set aside shilling 128 million for insurance of ferries for the Likoni Channel, shilling 149 million for the maintenance of ferries and jetty headquarters, and Kenya shilling 603 million for construction and expansion of airports and airstrips. Mr. Speaker, to support production of reliable and affordable energy, I have set aside a total of Kenya shilling 71.9 billion, excluding the provisions set aside under the Big Four initiatives. Out of these, Kenya shilling 50.1 billion will cater for transmission and distribution of power. Kenya shilling 11.3 billion for development of geothermal energy. Kenya shilling 6.4 billion for electrification of public facilities, and Kenya shilling 1.3 billion for development of nuclear energy, as well as exploration and mining of coal. Mr. Speaker, enhanced national security will create an enabling environment for business to thrive while aiding faster economic recovery. In this regard, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 294.5 billion to support operation of the National Police, Defense, and the National Intelligence Service. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocations include 119.8 billion for defense, Kenya shilling 42.5 billion for the National Intelligence Service, Kenya shilling 110.6 billion for policing and prison services, Kenya shilling 10.7 billion for leasing of police motor vehicles, and Kenya shilling 1 billion for police modernization program. Mr. Speaker, to step up war on crime and enhance support for administration of justice, I have set aside Kenya shilling 1.5 billion for the National Communication and Surveillance System, and Kenya shilling 335 million to equip the National Forensic Laboratory. Mr. Speaker, other allocations include Kenya shilling 4.8 billion for medical insurance for the National Police Service and prisons, Kenya shilling 2.3 billion for the group personal insurance for the National Police and prisons, as well as Kenya shilling 1 billion for the National Integrated Identity Management System. Mr. Speaker, the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic last year disrupted in-person learning, leading to closure of schools for 9 months. The government is determined to recover the lost time while ensuring safe learning in our schools, colleges, and universities. In this respect, I have set aside a total of Kenya shilling 202.8 billion to support programs in the education sector. Mr. Speaker, out of the proposed allocation, Kenya shilling 12 billion will cater for free primary education, Kenya shilling 2.5 billion for recruitment of teachers, Kenya shilling 62.2 billion for free day secondary education, including insurance under the NHI for secondary school students, Kenya shilling 4 billion for examination fee waiver for all class 8 and Form 4 candidates, and Kenya shilling 1.8 billion for the school feeding program. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 1 billion for the competency-based curriculum, and Kenya shilling 420 million for the digital literacy program and ICT integration in our secondary schools. Mr. Speaker, to support infrastructure development and ensure safe learning in our schools, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 4.2 billion for primary and secondary schools infrastructure, and Kenya shilling 1.8 billion for construction and equipping of technical training institutes and vocational training centers. Further, Kenya shilling 1.1 billion has been set aside to increase access and improve the quality of technical and vocational education and training programs under the East African Skills Transformation and Regional Integration Project. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations to the education sector includes Kenya shilling 281.7 billion to Teacher Service Commission, Kenya shilling 76.3 billion for university education, Kenya shilling 15.8 billion to the Higher Education Loans Board, Kenya shilling 5.8 billion for Kenya Secondary School Education Quality Improvement Project, and Kenya shilling 5.2 billion capitation to TVET students. Further, Kenya shilling 745 million has been set aside for the technical vocational education training and entrepreneurship. Kenya shilling 633 million for promotion of youth employment and vocational training, and Kenya shilling 323 million for the National Research Fund. Mr. Speaker, when COVID-19 pandemic struck last year, we injected additional resources to the traditional cash transfer program to cushion the vulnerable in our society. To continue protecting this vulnerable segment, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 37.8 billion for social protection and affirmative actions in this budget. Mr. Speaker, out of this allocation, Kenya shilling 16.7 billion will cater for cash transfers to elderly persons, Kenya shilling 7.9 billion for orphans and vulnerable children, and Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for orphans, for persons living with severe disabilities. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation also includes Kenya shilling 4.1 billion for the Kenya Hunger Safety Net program, Kenya shilling 3.7 billion for the Kenya Development Response to Displacement Impact Project, and Kenya shilling 2.7 billion for the Kenya Social and Economic Inclusion Project. In addition, Kenya shilling 933.8 million will go to the Child Welfare Society of Kenya. Kenya shilling 400 million for the presidential Mr. Speaker, the most pressing challenge in our country at the moment is lack of job opportunities for the youth. This has been exacerbated by the hard economic times following the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic. In order to empower the youth and support businesses owned by youth, women, and persons living with disabilities, I have set aside Kenya shilling 10 billion for the National Youth Service, Kenya shilling 2.2 billion for the Kenya Youth Empowerment and Opportunities Project, Kenya shilling 454.1 million for the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, Kenya shilling 120 million for the Women Enterprise Fund, and Kenya shilling 62 million for the Youth Employment and Enterprise Fund. Mr. Speaker, to promote regional equity, reduce poverty, and enhance social development, I have set aside Kenya shilling 41.7 billion for the National Government Constituency Development Fund, Kenya shilling 2.1 billion for the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, as well as Kenya shilling 2.8 billion for the Equalization Fund to finance programs in the previously marginalized areas. Mr. Speaker, the rapid technological advancements portend great potential to catalyze economic recovery, create jobs, and improve lives and livelihood for Kenyans. To leverage on these technological gains, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 20.9 billion to fund initiatives in the information, communication, and technology sector. Specifically, these allocations include Kenya shilling 1 billion for government shared services, Kenya shilling 670 million for the digital literacy program. Further, to fast-track the development of the Konza Technopolis City, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 12 billion for the horizontal infrastructure phase 1, Kenya shilling 3.6 billion for Konza Data Center and Smart City facilities, Kenya shilling 400 million for construction of Konza Complex phase 1B, and Kenya shilling 200 million for development of Konza Technopolis Master Plan. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations include Kenya shilling 1.2 billion for maintenance and rehabilitation of National Optic Fiber Backbone Phase 2 expansion cable, Kenya shilling 1.1 billion for installation and commissioning of Eldoret Nadapal fiber optic cable, and Kenya shilling 463 million for maintenance and rehabilitation of last mile county connectivity network. Mr. Speaker, the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing containment measures significantly affected tourism, sports, culture, and arts sectors. To support recovery of these sectors, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 15 billion for the Sports, Arts, and Social Development Fund, Kenya shilling 1.7 billion for the Tourism Fund, Kenya shilling 643 million for the Tourism Promotion Fund, and Kenya shilling 90 million for refurbishment of the regional stadium. Mr. Speaker, to expand access to clean and adequate water for domestic and agricultural use, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 38 billion for water and sewerage infrastructure development, Kenya shilling 16.4 billion for water resource management, and Kenya shilling 10.8 billion for water storage and flood control. In addition, I have set aside Kenya shilling 10.5 billion for irrigation and land reclamation, and Kenya shilling 1.6 billion for water harvesting and storage for irrigation. Mr. Speaker, in order to support environment and water conservation, I have set aside Kenya shilling 9.6 billion for forest and water towers conservation, Kenya shilling 3.3 billion for environment management and protection, Kenya shilling 1.4 billion for meteorological services, and Kenya shilling 8.2 billion for wildlife conservation and management. Mr. Speaker, to enhance good governance and scale up fight against corruption, I have set aside Kenya shilling 3.3 billion for the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, Kenya shilling 3.2 billion for the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, and Kenya shilling 7.6 billion for the Criminal Investigation Services, and Kenya shilling 5.9 billion for the Office of the Auditor General. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, to enhance the oversight and legislative role of Parliament and access to justice, I propose to set aside Kenya shilling 37.9 billion for Parliament and Kenya shilling 17.9 billion for the judiciary. Mr. Speaker, acknowledging the place of devolution in our country, the county governments will receive Kenya shilling 370 billion as equitable share, representing 27.3% of the most recent audited and approved revenue raised nationally, in line with Article 2032 of the Constitution. In addition, the county governments will receive Kenya shilling 7.5 billion as conditional allocation from the national government share of revenue, and Kenya shilling 32.3 billion from development partners, bringing the total allocation to the county government for the financial year 2021-22 to Kenya shilling 409.9 billion. Indeed, this marks a substantial increase compared to Kenya shilling 353.2 billion allocation in the financial year 2020-21, a clear testimony of the government's commitment to supporting devolution. Mr. Speaker, in line with the High Court ruling on petition number 252 of 2016, directing that conditional and unconditional grants to county government should not be provided for under the Division of Revenue Act, the National Treasury is in consultation with other stakeholders is developing an appropriate legal instrument to be used to disburse additional conditional grants from the national government's share of revenue, as well as from proceeds of loans and grants to county governments. Mr. Speaker, in February 2020, the national government and the national city county government entered into a mutual agreement in line with Article 187 of the Constitution, through which the Nairobi City County transferred some of its functions to the national government. To ensure that the process of such a transfer of functions is fully reinforced in law, the National Treasury is developing a legislation to operationalize Articles 187 and 189 of the Constitution on transfer of functions and cooperation between the national and county governments. Mr. Speaker, to facilitate performance of the transferred functions by the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, I propose to allocate Kenya shilling 27.2 billion, which will comprise 18 billion for recurrent expenditure and Kenya shilling 9.2 billion for development expenditure. Mr. Speaker, to support county governments' capacities to enhance their own source revenue and reduce our reliance on equitable share, the National Treasury rolled out a nationwide capacity building exercise for county governments on interventions contained in the national policy to support enhancement of county government own source revenue. Mr. Speaker, the policy proposes broadening of the revenue basis while enhancing counties' revenue administrative capacities. The policy further proposes legal framework to ensure that the county governments comply with Article 209(5) of the Constitution of Kenya when formulating their revenue-raising measures. In this regard, we resubmitted the County Government Revenue-Raising Process Bill 2020 to this House in early 2020 for consideration. It is my hope that this bill will get necessary priority and approval. Further, Mr. Speaker, the government, through a multi-agency task force, has reviewed existing revenue management systems with a view to deploying one integrated county revenue management system for use by all the 47 county governments. The task force has completed its work and made appropriate recommendations for consideration by the two levels of government. Mr. Speaker, in order to provide basic services to the previously marginalized areas, as envisioned under the Constitution of Kenya, the concerned county governments have been allocated Kenya shilling 6.8 billion under the Equalization Fund in the financial year 2021-22. Mr. Speaker, arising from the High High Court ruling declaring the Equalization Fund guidelines unconstitutional, the National Treasury has developed the Public Finance Management Regulations 2021, which is now before this House for consideration. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to taxation policy measures for the financial 2021-22 budget. I will begin by highlighting some of the key measures on custom duty as agreed during the East African Community Partner States pre-budget consultation in May 2021. I'll then highlight some of the proposed amendments in the various tax laws relating to tax administration. These amendments are contained in the Finance Bill 2021 that I submitted to this House in April 2021 for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, the custom measures agreed by the East African Community Partner States and the proposed amendments in the Finance Bill 2021 are expected to generate an additional shilling 8.7 billion to the Exchequer for the financial 2021-22 budget. On custom duties, Mr. Speaker, during the East African Community pre-budget meeting, the ministers noted with concern the proliferation of cheap imports into the region and agreed on measures to protect locally manufactured products from unfair competition. The agreed measures under customs shall become effective from 1st July 2021. Mr. Speaker, to sustain the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, East African partner states have agreed to extend the duty-free importation window for raw materials and inputs for manufacture of masks, sanitizers, ventilators, and personal protective equipment remission for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, over the years, we have developed sufficient capacity for local manufacturing in the metal and allied subsector. This has generated job opportunities for our youth. However, the local manufacturers in this subsector continue to face stiff competition from cheaper imports. In this regard, and in order to continue protecting this subsector, the East African partner states agreed that imported iron and steel products shall continue attracting a duty rate of 25% with the corresponding specific rates for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, our farmers have been working hard to produce enough food to satisfy demand in the region. In particular, the sector has been meeting local demands for vegetable products, including potatoes, peas, and tomatoes, among others. To protect these farmers and the sector from cheap imports, the East African partner states agreed that vegetable products, including potatoes, peas, tomatoes, among others, shall attract a duty rate of 30% for 1 year as we await the finalization of the review of the East African Community Common External Tariff. Mr. Speaker, baby diapers are essential products and there is need to supply them at affordable prices. In this regard, last year we allowed manufacturers to access inputs for manufacture of baby diapers duty-free under duty remission scheme. This was meant to support Kenya's capacity to manufacture these products locally and create jobs. I am happy to note that many companies have responded to these incentives by increasing production. In order to nurture the growth of this industry and to continue sustaining the smiles of our babies, we have agreed to extend the duty-free importation of inputs for manufacture of baby diapers for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has sufficient raw material for manufacture of leather and footwear products. In support of this sector, the government has imposed a duty of 25% on imported products for manufacture of leather and footwear products. However, the sector continues to face competition from imported products due to undervaluation, thereby discouraging investments in the sector. To this effect, and in order to enhance incomes of our farmers, the East African Community Partner States have agreed to retain the import duty on imported products for manufacture of leather and footwear products at 25% and introduce a further specific duty rate to guard against undervaluation. Mr. Speaker, our micro, small, and medium enterprises that operate in the Jokali sector have continued to thrive, creating jobs and incomes to millions of families. Of particular interest is the furniture industry that has continued to attract local artisans who have been able to provide high-quality products. However, the industry continues to face stiff competition for imported finished products, sometimes of low quality. In this regard, the East African Community Partner States agreed to extend the applicable import duty on furniture at the rate of 35% for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, to give impetus to the affordable housing programs and facilitate availability of locally made roofing tiles at affordable prices, East African Community Partner States agreed to extend for a further 1 year the duty-free window for importing inputs for the manufacture of roofing tiles under the duty remission scheme. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the proposed amendments to the Income Tax Act. Mr. Speaker, to ensure equity and fairness in taxation, I have proposed to align the Income Tax Act with international best practice, through which introduction of provisions to prevent tax-based erosion and profit shifting, as well as restrict treaty benefits to curb tax evasion and avoidance. In this respect, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to expand the definition of the term permanent establishment so as to align the Income Tax Act with international best practice. Mr. Speaker, the Finance Act 2020 introduced the digital service tax on income earned through the digital marketplace. However, the current tax provision do not cover all traders who use the digital service platform to transact their business. In this regard, I propose to expand the scope of the digital service tax to include income derived from internet and electronic networks. Further, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to align the rate of withholding tax on service fees in the extractive industry with that withheld in respect of management and professional services under the same sector. This will remove ambiguity and manipulation that result in leakage of tax revenue through characterization of income. Mr. Speaker, the private contribution made to insurance companies enjoy tax relief. However, the contribution to the National Health Insurance Fund do not enjoy this relief, despite the fund being the largest medical cover for majority of Kenyans under the universal health care. In order to support the contributors and encourage more non-registered persons to join the fund, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to allow the contribution to the National Health Insurance Fund qualify for tax relief at the rate of 15% of the contributed amount. Mr. Speaker, the Income Tax Act provides for a tax rebate to employers who offer internship to a minimum of 10 university graduates for a period of 1 year. These employers are allowed to deduct from their taxable income an extra 50% out of the cost of the apprenticeship emolument. In order to encourage employers to provide similar opportunities for TVET graduates, I propose an amendment to the Income Tax Act to include graduates of TVET institutions under the program. Accordingly, employers who engage a minimum of 10 graduates from both universities and TVET institutions will be allowed to deduct from their taxable income an extra 50% out of the cost of apprenticeship emolument. It is my hope that employers will take advantage of this incentive and give our young graduates from TVET institutions opportunities to gain practical experience so as to expand their employability. Mr. Speaker, last year, we revised the investment allowance regime under the second schedule to include Tax Act to introduce a new regime and retain the reducing balance method of deduction. However, under this method, deduction rarely gets exhausted. In order to cure this problem, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to replace the reducing balance method with the straight line method, which provides definite timeline for the deductions. This will provide certainty in taxation, ease tax administration, and enhance compliance. Mr. Speaker, we have noted that the current provisions in deductibility of interest allow some taxpayers to manipulate their balance sheets to reduce their tax liabilities. I therefore propose to replace the current thin capitalization rule that is based on debt to equity ratio with interest restrictions based on a ratio of earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Accordingly, any interest paid in excess of 30% of a company's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization will be disallowed in determination of taxable income. Mr. Speaker, in addition to being an international best practice, these measures has been found to be a better indicator of an economic performance of businesses, hence appropriate for determining the deductibility of interest on loans. This will guard against tax planning. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the proposed amendments under the Value Added Tax Act. In order to strengthen our healthcare system, make the cost of medicines affordable for Kenyans, and step up the fight against COVID-19 pandemic, I propose to introduce VAT exemption on medicaments used in our health facilities, including decongestants and food supplements. Further, I propose to provide VAT exemptions to diagnostic and laboratory reagents, artificial respirators, including therapeutic respiration apparatus, breathing appliances, gas masks, as well as medical equipment and technologies used in the provision of medical care services. It is my hope that the suppliers of this medicament and medical equipment will reciprocate by making their prices affordable. Mr. Speaker, in order to promote local manufacturing of pharmaceutical products, I also propose to introduce VAT exemption on inputs used in the manufacture of medical ventilators and breathing appliances. This will enhance access to these products that are essential in management of the COVID-19 complications. Mr. Speaker, despite the huge potential for mineral and petroleum resources in the country, exploration and mining sector remains underdeveloped due to huge capital outlay requirements. In order to promote exploration and mining activities in the country, I propose to exempt from VAT goods for inclusive use in geothermal or oil exploration and mine prospecting. Mr. Speaker, to boost Kenya's effort on green energy, I propose to exempt from VAT equipment for generation of solar and wind energy. Mr. Speaker, to provide a transition clause to allow companies that had already signed power purchase agreements with government, I propose to amend the Value Added Tax Act to provide for a transition for the project that had been signed before April 2020, to enable them to continue benefiting from the VAT exemption in respect of taxable goods used in the project. This transition will expire upon completion of the said projects. Mr. Speaker, in order to entrench the benefit of affordable housing, including specialized facilities like the student hostels, it is imperative to develop innovative financing alternatives. In this regard, I propose to exempt from VAT asset transfers in the real estate investment trust and asset-backed securities. This will deepen our capital markets by encouraging investors to participate in the real estate investment trust. Mr. Speaker, as I turn to the proposed amendments to the Excise Duty Act, the Finance Act 2020 removed excise duty on betting. The removal of this tax generated a lot of public debate, considering that betting has become widespread in our society, resulting in negative social effects. In this regard, I propose to reintroduce excise duty on betting at the rate of 20% of the amount wagered. Mr. Speaker, innovations in the tobacco industry has led to introduction of new products such as nicotine pouches. These new products do not fall in the classification of tobacco products existing in the Excise Duty Act and are therefore currently not subject to taxation. In this regard, I propose excise duty on products containing nicotine or nicotine substitutes at a specific rate of Kenya 5 per gram. This rate of excise duty is equivalent to the duty applicable to similar products under this Act. Mr. Speaker, to support the growth of service industry, particularly e-commerce, I propose to amend the Excise Duty Act so as to provide a rebate on the excise duty paid on internet data by a person who purchases the data in bulk for resale. Mr. Speaker, on the proposals to ease tax administration, Kenya ratified and deposited the multilateral convention for mutual administration assistance in tax matters with the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information on Tax Matters in July 2020. This convention is meant to facilitate automatic exchange of tax information between Kenya Revenue Authority and other jurisdictions. In this regard, I have proposed amendments to the Tax Procedure Act 2015 to facilitate the implementation of the convention. The convention will also enhance tax compliance by foreign taxpayers and act as a deterrent to tax evasion and illicit financial flows. In addition, I propose to amend the Tax Procedures Act to empower the Kenya Revenue Authority seek intervention of other agencies to facilitate compliance with the provisions of the Digital Service Tax. Mr. Speaker, there are various ways that some unpatriotic individuals are using to evade payments of their tax liabilities. For example, we have noted in our iTax system perennial non-compliant taxpayers, defaulters, payment returns without payment, non-filers, nil filers, credit filers, stop filers, and decliners. In addition, there are traders and merchants who are not registered at all for tax purposes. Mr. Speaker, to gather information on tax malpractices, last year, we introduced the iWhistle, a platform that enables members of the public to volunteer information. As at the end of April 2021, the iWhistle platform had received a total of 502 whistles, and we thank the public for volunteering useful information. Considering the complexities and changing dynamics of intelligence gathering, and to empower the Kenya Revenue Authority tax malpractices, I propose to amend the Kenya Revenue Authority Act to increase the maximum reward to a person who provides information leading to the identification of unassessed taxes from Kenya shilling 100,000 to Kenya shilling 500,000. Further, I propose to increase the reward to a person who provides information leading to recovery from maximum of Kenya shilling 2 million to Kenya shilling 5 million. This will encourage receipt of voluntary information to Kenya Revenue Authority, thereby bolstering tax compliance and revenue collections. Mr. Speaker, the Tax Appeals Tribunal has been hearing tax disputes and providing judgments at a very slow pace as the tribunal sits on a part-time basis. This has led to a huge backlog of pending cases before the tribunal. Currently, there are 549 pending cases with a revenue implication of $107.4 billion. In order to strengthen the tribunal and allow members to expeditiously hear and conclude cases, I have proposed various amendments to the Act through Tax Appeals Tribunal, Bill 2021, which I have submitted to this House for consideration. I urge the House to prioritize this bill so as to facilitate faster disposal of tax appeals to enable us boost revenue collection. Mr. Speaker, the processing of applications under the ESC duty remission scheme has been manual, time-consuming, and inefficient. In order to improve administration of the scheme, the government automated the process under the single window system and successfully rolled out in September 2020. Mr. Speaker, to strengthen the administration of tax exemptions process for official aid-funded projects, we have embarked on automation of the application and approval under the single window system and target to roll out in the next financial year. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I must state that the preparation of this budget required a lot of balancing. It has not been an easy process, considering the prevailing weak business environment. I am confident that the plans I have laid in this budget will be realized to achieve the envisaged economic recovery that will lead to improvement of the welfare of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, it's worthy to note that our President has steered our economy through one of the most difficult periods occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. His leadership and commitment to protection of lives and livelihoods through implementation of a host of measures have not only reduced the fatalities caused by COVID-19, but also supported economic activities. Mr. Speaker, the budget I presented today has articulated additional measures that the government plans to undertake to further boost economic recovery. In light of the challenges in mobilization of additional revenue and rising expenditure demands, spending in the next year's budget will focus on critical areas with the highest impact on the well-being of Kenyans. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I sincerely thank His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta for his wise counsel, unfailing support and guidance, not only during the budget preparation process, but also in the stewardship of the economy. I also thank my fellow cabinet secretaries, the various accounting officers, and staff for their contributions to the financial 2021-22 budget process. Mr. Speaker, I also express deep gratitude to Kenyans for the insightful contributions, proposals, and suggestions that helped us to finalize this budget. In addition, my appreciation also goes to, first, the Honorable Speakers of the National Assembly and the Senate, the majority and minority leaders, as well as other leadership of the House, and their respective class for overseeing the approval of the budget estimates for the financial 2021-22 and the related documents. Second, to honorable members of the Budget and Appropriation Committee, the Finance and National Planning Committee, and other departmental committees of this House, as well as the staff of the Parliamentary Service Budget Office, for their constructive input during the approval process of the budget. Third, in a very special way, I give tribute to my incredible, selfless team at the National Treasury and Planning who have worked tirelessly for very long hours to ensure that this budget and supporting documents were prepared in time as per their legal requirements. Fourth, the management and staff of Kenya Revenue Authority, Central Bank of Kenya, the Attorney General's Office, Commission of Revenue Allocation, financial sector regulators, and the various agencies under the National Treasury and Planning for their contributions and advice during the budget process. Fifth, our multilateral development partners, especially International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and all other bilateral development partners for their contribution to our development agenda through various technical and financial support. Further, I thank the private sector for their resilience and continued contribution to the economic development of this country. Sixth, my appreciation goes to the fourth estate for the active reporting on economic and financial development, as well as engagement on the financial year 2021 and 2022 budget process. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I remain grateful to my family for their unfailing support, regular encouragement, and understanding as I steer my responsibility at the National Treasury and Planning at a critical time like this. I thank you all, and may God bless Kenya. Mr. Speaker, before I resume my seat, you recall in April 2021, I submitted to this House the budget estimates and the Finance Bill 2021, together with accompanying documents as required by the Public Finance Management Act 2012. Today, I further submit the following documents to this August House and request that you graciously receive them. 1, the budget statement for the financial 2021-22. 2, budget policy statement 2021, estimates of revenue, grants and loans for the financial year 2021-22 budget. 4, financial statement for the financial year 2021-2022 budget. 5, medium-term debt management strategy 2021. 6, budget highlights, the Mwananchi guide for the financial year 2021-22. And lastly, statistical annex to the budget statement for the financial year 2021-2022. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honourable members, I wish to thank the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning for having made this public pronouncement on the budget highlights on for the national government for the financial year 2021-2022 and the medium term and the revenue-raising measures. And as you know, our members, today's budget speech will not be accompanied by the usual parliamentary courtesies given the limitations occasioned by the prevailing COVID-19 pandemic and the attendant Ministry of Health's guidelines regarding public meetings. In this regard, upon adjournment of the House and exit of the Speaker's procession from the chamber, all guests are asked to depart the precincts of Parliament at their own pleasure. However, arrangements have been made for a modest press conference by the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury at Parliament Gardens. Our members may also take the opportunity to address the media on matters pertaining to the budget in the usual manner at the Parliamentary Gardens. Now, honourable members, time being 5 minutes past 5, the House now stands adjourned until Tuesday, 15th of June, 2021 at 2:30 p.m.
At the end of this afternoon's session from the National Assembly, whose highlight was delivery of the public pronouncement of the budget highlights and revenue-raising measures by none other than Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury and Planning, Ambassador Ukur Yatani, a 3.66 trillion shillings budget, which he says was arrived at after much with stakeholders and which has been delivered under the rallying call of job creation through continued and sustained economic growth. It has highlighted a number of priorities, policy priorities, including implementation of the Big Four agenda, health, under which the COVID-19 pandemic falls, and education, which is a big one for the current government. A live broadcast brought to you by the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit in conjunction with the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. At this point, we bring this to an end. We shall connect next week on the 15th of June. It will be a Tuesday afternoon when the National Assembly resumes sittings, which will be guided by a reviewed calendar that will see them having an afternoon sitting as well as an evening sitting on that Tuesday. My name is Vereso Mwanga. On behalf of the entire crew here, it is goodbye and back to Broadcasting House.